We cheer for explosions. We crave the adrenaline of danger. But behind the smoke and glory of cinema's most breathtaking moments, there are stories that were never meant to happen. Some filmmakers didn't settle for illusion, they wanted truth. So they threw away safety, reason, and sometimes morality. Actors bled for the camera. Crews risked their lives for a shot. And somewhere along the way, the line between art and madness disappeared. These are not tales of bravery, they're cautionary legends whispered in studio hallways. Productions where safety briefings turned into eulogies, and every scream might have been a real one. Moments when a scene became a crime scene. What happens when commitment turns to cruelty? When method becomes obsession? In chasing realism, these filmmakers discovered something terrifying. The most authentic images come at the highest cost. Tonight, we're stepping behind the curtain of the most dangerous action films ever made. Stories soaked in chaos, pride, and genuine fear. Some broke records. Some broke bones. A few broke souls. This is not about special effect. This is about what happens when reality itself becomes the stunt. These are 15 action films that crossed the line, and the line was drawn in blood. 1. The Twilight Zone. The movie, 1983. It was supposed to be a night of make-believe explosions, chaos, and controlled danger. But on the set of The Twilight Zone, the movie, that illusion shattered in the most horrifying way imaginable. Actor Vic Morrow stood under a hovering helicopter, clutching 2 children in his arms. The scene called for fire and destruction, a Hollywood vision of war. But when pyrotechnics ignited too close, the helicopter lost control. In seconds, it plunged down blades slicing through the air and then through flesh. 3 lives ended before the camera stopped rolling. The tragedy wasn't an accident born of chance. It was negligence, dressed as ambition. Director John Landis had ignored safety protocols, hired children illegally, and pushed his team to keep going even when the set felt unsafe. The footage was buried, but not the memory. A courtroom tried to assign blame, yet no one truly paid the price. Hollywood simply learned how to keep its monsters behind the scene. Ironically, Morrow's final line before the take was almost prophetic. "I shouldn't be doing this. This is too dangerous." The tragedy wasn't an accident born of chance. It was negligence, dressed as ambition. Director John Landis had ignored safety protocols, hired children illegally, and pushed his team to keep going even when the set felt unsafe. 2. Roar, 1981. If insanity ever had a movie poster, it would be Roar. In this 1981 disaster disguised as a family adventure, director Noel Marshall decided to film himself, his wife Tippi Hedren, and their children living peacefully among more than 100 untrained lions, tigers, and leopards. He called it an experiment in harmony. The result was blood, panic, and chaos caught on film. There were no animal trainers, no cages, no stunt doubles, just real people trapped with apex predators. Melanie Griffith, Marshall's daughter, was mauled so badly she needed facial reconstructive surgery. Hedren broke her leg under an elephant. The cinematographer's scalp was nearly torn off. 70 injuries, 0 special effects. Every roar in the movie is real. So is every scream. The film took more than a decade to finish, cost millions, and nearly ruined every life involved. Marshall called it art, the crew called it survival. When audiences finally saw it, they didn't know whether to laugh or look away. Because Roar proved one terrifying truth. When you try to control nature for the sake of a camera, nature always wins. 3. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Some directors want control. Francis Ford Coppola wanted chaos. When he set out to make Apocalypse Now, he didn't recreate the Vietnam War, he relived it. Filmed deep in the jungles of the Philippines, the production spiraled into madness that mirrored the story itself. 3. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Coppola, drowning in debt and obsession, confessed, "We weren't making a movie about war, we were in a war." When he set out to make Apocalypse Now, he didn't recreate the Vietnam War, he relived it. Filmed deep in the jungles of the Philippines, the production spiraled into madness that mirrored the story itself. Typhoons destroyed sets. The military reclaimed its borrowed helicopters mid-scene to fight real battles. Actors collapsed from exhaustion and fever. Martin Sheen suffered a massive heart attack and hid it, afraid the production would shut down. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and unprepared, forcing the crew to rewrite everything on the spot. When the film premiered, audiences hailed it as genius. But for those who lived through it, Apocalypse Now was less a movie and more a scar, proof that sometimes madness and masterpiece are born in the same fire. 4. The Exorcist, 1973. Director William Friedkin was obsessed with capturing genuine fear, not performance, not acting, but terror itself. To get it, he fired live blanks near his cast, blasted cold air on set until the actors could see their own breath, and violently yanked Ellen Burstyn backward with a harness so strong it injured her spine. The scream you hear in that scene, that piercing agony, is real. Crew members whispered that the set was cursed. A mysterious fire burned the entire stage except for one room, the bedroom used for the possession scenes. 9 people connected to the film died during or soon after production. Even priests were brought in to perform blessings. But Friedkin didn't stop. He pushed his cast until they broke physically, emotionally, spiritually. And in doing so, he made history. The Exorcist terrified the world. But behind its success lies a darker question. If fear becomes real, is it still art or simply cruelty captured on camera? 5. The Evil Dead, 1981. No money, no stunt team, no safety net, just a freezing forest, a few actors, and a director who refused to stop. But Friedkin didn't stop. He pushed his cast until they broke physically, emotionally, spiritually. And in doing so, he made history. 5. The Evil Dead, 1981. The cabin became a madhouse. No one was paid properly. No one trusted the director anymore. But the film, when finished, changed horror forever. The Evil Dead wasn't born from a studio or a budget. It was born from pain, insanity, and raw invention. Proof that sometimes the boundary between genius and recklessness is paper thin and soaked in blood. 6. Fitzcarraldo, 1982. Some directors dream of the impossible. Werner Herzog decided to film it. For Fitzcarraldo, Herzog demanded that his crew drag a 320-ton steamship over a mountain in the Amazon. Not a model, not a replica, but the real thing. He wanted authenticity. What he got was madness. Deep in the jungle, hundreds of locals and crew members fought mudslides, disease, and exhaustion. Engineers begged him to use effects. Herzog refused. He wanted the struggle itself to be part of the story. Men were injured. One sliced his leg open with a chainsaw. Another nearly died from infection. The lead actor fell ill and was replaced by Klaus Kinski, whose violent outbursts were so terrifying that the native extras offered to kill him to protect the crew. The production dragged on for years. The jungle swallowed equipment, money, and sanity alike. Yet Herzog kept filming, convinced he was capturing something pure. In the end, Fitzcarraldo became a monument to human obsession and to the destruction it causes. A ship conquered the mountain, yes, but it also buried the souls of those who dragged it there. 7. The Crow, 1994. It was supposed to be the role that made him a star. Instead, it became his epitaph. The Crow followed a man brought back from the dead to avenge his murder, but fate decided to blur fiction and reality. During the filming of a gunfight scene, a prop gun malfunctioned. A fragment of a real bullet had been left inside the barrel. When it fired, it struck Brandon Lee, piercing his abdomen. He collapsed instantly, not as part of the performance, but for real. At first, no one understood. The crew applauded, thinking it was brilliant acting. Then the blood didn't stop. Brandon Lee died in surgery at just 28 years old. Investigations uncovered a nightmare of negligence, improper prop handling, poor safety supervision, and a rush to finish filming. The parallels to his father, Bruce Lee's mysterious death, made it all the more haunting. The studio eventually finished the movie using doubles and early CGI. The Crow became a cult, classic, beautiful, tragic, cursed. Every frame is drenched in irony. A story about resurrection, forever marked by a real death. In the end, Brandon didn't need to act vengeance. Hollywood's carelessness wrote it for him. Aštuoni. Ben-Hur 1959. The chariot race in Ben-Hur remains one of cinema's greatest achievements and one of its most dangerous. It wasn't digital trickery. It was 1,950 seconds realism at full speed. Shot over months with hundreds of extras, real horses, and colossal sets, the sequence demanded perfection under chaos. Chariots collided, horses panicked, stuntmen were thrown into the air. One was nearly crushed to death. another broke his jaw. The dust, sweat, and fear you see in the scene are not performances, they're survival. Star Charlton Heston did most of his own stunts, driving a 4-horse chariot at racing speed, barely missing disaster in every take. Director William Wyler pushed his crew beyond endurance, capturing authenticity at any cost. The result was cinematic immortality and a grim precedent that great spectacle demanded great risk. Audiences gasped at the realism. Few knew that it had been paid for with blood, bruises, and broken bones. And Hollywood learned the wrong lesson that danger looked beautiful on screen. The next film took that lesson into the desert and turned it into chaos on wheels. The chariot race in Ben-Hur remains one of cinema's greatest achievements and one of its most dangerous. It wasn't digital trickery. It was 1,950 seconds realism at full speed. 9. Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior, 1,980. 1. Director George Miller, a former ER doctor, knew exactly how bones broke, and somehow that made him fearless. The sequel was shot in the Australian outback, far from studios, far from rules. Cars were real. Explosions were real. Stunts were only half rehearsed. One stunt went wrong when Guy Norris, a young stuntman, flew off his motorcycle and crashed headfirst into the ground. He broke his leg, but the shot looked incredible. They used it in the film. Vehicles flipped, fires burned too long, actors crawled away from wrecks, and limped back for another take. Miller didn't want polish. He wanted violence that felt authentic, and he got it. The film became a template for modern action. Dirty, visceral, iconic, but every frame came at a human cost. For the crew of Mad Max 2, there was no pretend. 10. The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, 2018. Few films have been haunted by their own creation quite like this one. For Terry Gilliam, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote wasn't just a movie, it was a lifelong curse. He first tried to make it in 2000. The universe seemed to revolt. Flash floods destroyed his sets. Fighter jets ruined the audio, and his leading man, Jean Rochefort, suffered a back injury so severe he had to abandon the project. Insurance pulled out. The crew scattered. All that remained were fragments of footage and a documentary aptly titled Lost in La Mancha. For the next 20 years, Gilliam kept chasing the dream. When the film finally re-emerged in 2017, disaster followed again. Lawsuits over ownership, collapsing financing, even a minor stroke that struck Gilliam himself before the premiere. The film's story, a man so obsessed with fantasy he can no longer tell it from reality, had become Gilliam's own reflection. He was Don Quixote, tilting at windmills of his own making. The final product may not have broken box office records, but it broke something more enduring: the myth that obsession always leads to genius. Sometimes it only leads to ruin. 11. Cannibal Holocaust, 1,980. Some films pretend to be real. Cannibal Holocaust dared the world to prove it wasn't. Director Ruggero Deodato wanted his movie to look so authentic that audiences would believe it was an actual documentary, and they did, so completely, in fact, that Deodato was arrested for murder after its release. To strengthen the illusion, he had his actors vanish from public life for months. When police demanded evidence that they were alive, he had to bring them to court. Only then was he cleared. But the film's true horror wasn't its illusion, it was what really happened. Animals were killed on camera, their deaths filmed in graphic close-up. The turtle, the monkey, the pig, none of them were props. The camera rolled as life ended, all in the name of artistic truth. Critics called it barbaric. Others called it genius. Nearly every country banned it at least once. Even decades later, the film remains a disturbing relic of what happens when the pursuit of realism crosses into moral decay. Some filmmakers fake savagery. Deodato filmed it. 12. Come and See, 1,985. It's one thing to depict war, it's another to make someone live it. In Come and See, Soviet director Elim Klimov wanted to show the nightmare of Nazi occupation through the eyes of a child, and he did so with terrifying precision. But in his search for authenticity, he didn't just direct his young actor, he broke him. 14-year-old Alexei Kravchenko was kept exhausted, hungry, and constantly frightened. Klimov exposed him to gunfire, explosions, and real soldiers firing blanks inches from his face. At one point, the boy was even hypnotized to dull his emotional reactions. When the film ended, he was barely recognizable, physically thinner, mentally hollow. He stopped acting for years. He later said, "I didn't pretend. I really saw war. The result is one of the most harrowing anti-war films ever made. Beautiful, horrifying, unforgettable. But the cost was a child's peace of mind, a coming-of-age story that stole the age itself. Some movies simulate trauma. Come and see manufactured it. 13. The Revenant, 2015. For most actors, pain is an illusion. For Leonardo DiCaprio, it was the job description. Director Alejandro G. Iñárritu vowed that The Revenant would capture nature exactly as it was, unforgiving, primal, and merciless. No green screens, no artificial light, just frozen rivers, real frostbite, and an actor willing to suffer for art. DiCaprio did everything the hard way. He ate raw bison liver, slept inside an animal carcass, and waded through icy water until his lips turned blue. The camera rolled while his body trembled, his beard froze, and his breath came in visible shivers. What we see on screen isn't acting, it's endurance. Crew members quit. Cameras malfunctioned in the cold. And yet, Iñárritu refused to compromise. He wanted his film to feel painfully real, and it does. When DiCaprio finally accepted the Oscar for the role, he wasn't just rewarded for a performance. He was rewarded for survival. But the question remains, how much reality should we demand from art? At what point does truth become torture? The Revenant blurred that line, leaving behind a masterpiece carved in frost, blood, and madness. 14. Rust, 2021. They thought it was just another rehearsal. Then the gun fired. On the 21st of October 2021, the set of Rust became the site of one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. Actor Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger of a prop gun, not knowing a live round was inside. Cinematographer Helena Hutchins fell, fatally wounded. Director Joel Souza collapsed behind her, injured. What followed was shock, confusion, and grief. The illusion of control, the safety of movie magic shattered instantly. The investigation revealed a culture of shortcuts. Inexperienced crew members ignored warnings, previous accidental discharges on the same set. Hours before the shooting, workers had already walked off in protest of unsafe conditions. Hutchins' death reignited an old haunting question. How many times does this have to happen before Hollywood learns? The tragedy echoed Brandon Lee's fate in The Crow, as if the industry had forgotten its own sins. This time, the cameras captured not a story but a reckoning. Rust will forever stand as a symbol of negligence disguised as filmmaking, a reminder that in cinema, one careless moment can turn fiction into fatality. 15. Enter the Void, 2009. Some films push boundaries. Enter the Void obliterated them, not for the actors, but for the audience. Directed by Gaspar Noé, it's a hypnotic, hallucinatory descent into death and rebirth, filmed entirely from a floating, first-person perspective. The camera drifts like a soul without rest, passing through walls, light, and time. But Noé didn't just want you to watch his vision, he wanted you to feel it. Using relentless strobe lights, flashing colors, and disorienting camera moves, he created a cinematic trip so intense that theaters had to issue seizure warnings. Some viewers fainted, others fled the room. It was less a film and more an assault on the senses. For Noé, that was the point. Cinema should be experienced physically, he said, and he succeeded. Enter the Void became infamous for making audiences sick, shaken, and haunted. It proved that the danger of realism doesn't always exist behind the camera. Sometimes, it stares directly into the viewer's eyes and dares them to keep watching. Bonus fact, Man Bites Dog 1992. It began as a satire. It ended as a mirror. Man Bites Dog was meant to mock the media's obsession with violence, but it went so far that many viewers forgot it was a joke. The film follows a documentary crew shadowing a serial killer named Ben. At first, they simply film, they observe, they remain objective, but slowly, their role changes. They start holding microphones closer, adjusting lights, helping him dispose of bodies, until finally they are part of the murders. The twist isn't that the film feels real, it's that it forces you to realize how easily the camera and the people behind it can become complicit. The filmmakers themselves play the crew in the story, so when the line between fiction and reality dissolves, it's not just performance, it's self-incrimination. Viewers laughed nervously, unsure if they were watching a parody or a confession. When Man Bites Dog premiered at Cannes, half the audience walked out. The other half applauded. It was banned in several countries, praised in others, and forever remembered as one of the most disturbingly self-aware films ever made. The message was simple and damning. Evil isn't only in the act, it's in the lens that refuses to look away. So maybe Man Bites Dog didn't belong among dangerous action films, but it understood something. They all forgot that filming violence can be its own kind of crime. So where is the limit? At what point does passion become punishment and art become cruelty. Every film on this list began as a dream of authenticity, of perfection. But somewhere between the director's vision and the actor's scream, that dream turned into something darker. We celebrate realism, but at what cost? A broken bone? A death? A scar that never heals? Maybe that's the secret no studio press kit ever admits, that cinema's greatest moments are sometimes born in pain. But pain doesn't always make art. Sometimes it only leaves ghosts behind. Now it's your turn. Which of these stories hit you the hardest? Were these filmmakers visionaries chasing truth, or architects of their own madness? Leave your thoughts below. Because behind every perfect frame, someone might have paid for it with their life.